Hello guys, it's Kasim. Welcome back again to my channel. I hope you're doing all right, having a good week. Okay, so I want to talk about Benjamin Mendy. I'm sure you've seen it in the papers. I'm sure you've probably seen that he's obviously been accused of some very sexual assault and some very serious things, and is basically been released on bail until January. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this because I made some notes on it. And maybe there might be something for you to think about. You might agree with me, you may disagree with me. We can have a dialogue, we can have a conversation. You tell me what you think. But before we get into that, guys, if you want to help me get to 1,000 subscribers by June, please can you like and subscribe to my channel. You would be an absolute legend. Thank you very much. Okay, so the first thing that I wrote down here is we still live in an era of innocent until proven guilty, right? And I think, what was it? In the olden days, you used to have trial by media, trial by the crowd. And part of what's made the legal system and the world a fairer place is that we don't trial people based on opinion. We don't trial people, and we don't sort of put people in prison based on prejudices. We trial people based on evidence, meaning that until the court has decided or a jury has decided, they've looked at all the evidence, they looked at all the circumstances, they've spoken to the victims, they've spoken to witnesses, they've had character witnesses, they've had all the full information, then they do not make a judgment and they do not sort of condemn anyone. And I guess the thing that I really wanted to speak to you about is, have you come to a conclusion when you don't have all the full facts? Have you already decided that Benjamin is guilty just because people have come forward and said that this is so? Meaning, excuse me, meaning, are you saying to me that you're saying that if a lot of people believe something, that it must be true? If a lot of people are saying that something is so, then it must be true. Let me tell you why. Because I have lived in neighborhoods where people have wanted. I haven't lived in neighborhoods. I've studied people who've lived in neighborhoods where they didn't. The neighborhood didn't want those people, and those people would make up accusations that that person was doing stuff, and when that person wasn't doing anything, right? And they just wanted to get that person out of the community because they wanted the community to be a certain way. And so what I'm trying to say to you is, just because everybody agrees on something, does that make the person guilty? Does that mean that the person is in the wrong? Right? In the olden, I cannot tell you the amount of stories that I've studied, particularly stories of around the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where I've studied stories where people have been convicted of rape, they've been convicted of certain things, and back in those days, of course, we didn't have a fairer justice system. And you ask, how were they convicted? And they were convicted because it was police officers got together and they made a judgment. The judge had already come up with a conclusion before the evidence was even seen. And part of the reason why they've been exonerated today, in 2000 and whatever, is because when they look back at the case and they're like, but there was no evidence, but the witnesses didn't even have, but they weren't, like, what? How could you have convicted this person for this crime when they had nothing? And so I guess what I'm trying to suggest to you is, you are, anyone who is over the age of 25 is an adult now. We are the adults. We're the people who are setting the rules, who are setting the standard for how we should be judging people. Right? You may say, Cassie, I don't have children. You don't have to have children. You're still a member of our community, and your opinion matters. And if you, for example, believe that he's guilty and you don't give him the benefit of the doubt and you don't allow, you don't see all the evidence, then that means, my question to you is then, what are you going to be teaching other kids? My question to you is, what conversation are you having with people within the community? Because you're part of the community and you're spreading either rumors or you're talking about things that people have done that may not necessarily be true. You are getting into a situation where you're destroying somebody's reputation even though they may not be guilty. That doesn't, in me saying this, that doesn't mean that Benjamin is innocent, okay? Right? It doesn't mean anything. It's just that the question that I think is really important that we need to have a conversation about is, have you seen all of the evidence? or have you seen a certain limited amount of information that has been given to you out of context, and then and you don't even have the sources. You're simply taking what the news has said. You're simply taking snippets of what you've heard, and then you're coming up with a judgment. So my question to you is, what is your paradigm of analysis? How are you coming up with your own conclusion? I think it's really, really important, because like this is important because you may become a manager in a workplace and you have to make decisions like this. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said to them, if you had a father who was expecting a child and he came to you and he said, look, actually, let me put it another way because it'd be easier. So I said to my friend, if you were a manager and you have two men who both have worked for your company for the same amount of time, both of them are the same age, both of them have the same results in terms of output and productivity, both of them are equal in every other way, but one of them came to you and said that I'm expecting a child, my wife's just come to me and said that I'm expecting a child, and I need a pay increase because I need to be able to afford the child, and I've obviously worked here for a long time. Please, can I have a pay rise? And somebody else came to you who is exactly the same situation, except for they come to you and they're not expecting a child, but they say, I've worked for the company for this time, my results are this, please can I have a pay rise? Who would you give it to? See, most of us think that is a far-fetched example, it will never happen, but it happens all the time. And the question is, you have to be able to be fair. You have to be able to look at all the evidence, look at all of the context, look at the situation, and come up with a decision. Now, I know that obviously in Benjamin's case, this is a much higher profile and a lot more sensitive subject. But my point being is, it's the same principle. How are you coming up with analysis and a conclusion about what you believe? What is the foundation of your conclusion? It's really important, because how do you know that you're fair? How do you know that you're not biased? Because we all have biases. I have biases. I'm at times find myself saying things that may not necessarily be the best decision. So my question to you is, how are you making the world better because you are trying to make yourself better in your ability to make decisions? So that's the first thing I was thinking about. The second thing that I was thinking about is, what are you doing to discipline your character? One of the things that has changed my life that I wrote down and I was journaling about was, I wrote down that all the bad in the world that has ever been acted upon was done by humans, and I'm one of them. See, that statement is a very serious statement, because if you understand that all the bad in the world that has ever happened is being done by human beings, you see, this is serious, because you could say, well, hold on a minute, Kasim, those are evil people. See, when I've tried my very best to get away from this, because when you say, well, those people who commit murders, who do robbery, they're all evil, what that then does is it separates you from them. It says that you in some way are superior to them. You in some way are not in danger of malevolence. Listen to me. This is what I wrote down. I wrote down that every single person on this planet, if they were put under the right circumstances and under the right incentives, they would take the life of another human being. And if you don't believe me, this is what I say to people. If I had your mum or your dad and I was torturing them, I was causing them a lot of pain, or your children, and all of a sudden you found yourself in a situation where you could kill me and you could escape and you could free them, would you allow your family to continue being tortured? Now, every person I've given to this question to you has of course said, well, Kasim, of course I'd kill the person. But that means you have the capacity to take somebody's life. And what I'm trying to say to you is, obviously I'm talking about a really extreme case here, but when we bring it back down to reality, that means you have the capacity for malevolence. That means you have the capacity to torture people, to abuse people, to terrorize people, to neglect people, to abuse power. That means you have the capacity for it if you are put under the right conditions. The question that then I ask you to think about is, what are you doing to ensure that you are working on your character, that if you were ever put in such a position, you would have to really think about this. It's something for you to think about, because, like, for example, a lot of people say, well, Kasim, if I had a lot of money, I wouldn't be corrupt. Well, a lot of people say that, and then they had a lot of money, but then they're corrupt, right? And I think part of the reason why that happens, not the whole reason, but I think part of the reason it happens is because there's a lot of people who think that they're above reproach, who believe that they are above corruption. They believe that they're above being hurting other people. A lot of people think that butter wouldn't melt, that they could never hurt other people. But they could if they were put under the right circumstances. So one of the things that I'm constantly one of my beliefs is that as a man, particularly as a man, you need to put yourself in situations where every single year your character is challenged. Meaning you run a marathon, you do an army course where you go through an army regime, right? But something where your character is challenged, where you're like, ooh, I don't know whether I can make it through this, right? Because most of us presume that being a good person is something that comes natural. I disagree. I think that as human beings, at the center of who we are, we're very selfish. We have self-preservation as one of our core drives. So we would rather look after ourselves and what we want and what we need before we look after anybody else. And so as a result, being a good person, having discipline, having empathy, putting other people first is a practice. You have to actually practice it. Question to you is, are you practicing it? What if I came and observed you for the next month? Would your life show me that you've got practices in your life and disciplines in your life that would protect me against you? Do you even realize that you're a danger to me were you to be put in the right situation? Something for you to think about. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on, as you've been reflecting on Benjamin Mendy. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you think he's guilty? Do you think he's not guilty? What is the context that you've and the analysis that you've been thinking about to come up with a conclusion for this? I'd love to hear from you. We can have a dialogue. We can have a conversation. I hope you found this useful. Please, if you want to help me get to 1,000 subscribers by June, like and subscribe to my channel. You'd be an absolute legend. Apart from that, thank you very much for listening, and I will speak to you soon. Bye for now. Cheers, guys.